I've been lucky to be able to travel to the Holy Lands, and I've been to Egypt, Israel, Rome, and Greece. But just a little introduction, I work for a company called Right Now Media. We make Christian Bible study videos, and I'm on their team. And so I get to do a lot of traveling. But a lot of the places in this PowerPoint are things I've just kind of done on my own outside of work too. So, and I just love studying biblical archaeology and going to the places where our faith took place. So let's go ahead and start. And the first thing I want to say is, we live in an age that there's a lot of people who are skeptical about the Bible. And so I love studying apologetics to defend the Christian faith. And one part of that is archaeology, which is my favorite thing. You can actually buy the archaeology study Bible, and they have pictures and information about the different places. And I'm always surprised when I read the Bible. Every time I see a name or a place, I'm like, I wonder if they found anything about that. So I just go to Google and search for it, and I'm always surprised how many things they have found. So Hebron is a place in Israel, and this is actually where Abraham is buried. And King Herod built this palace over the place where Abraham was buried. And I'm just going to kind of go through these slides because I want to show it quickly, because I want to show you guys a lot of information here. So I got to go to Egypt, and that camel ride is pretty fun. I got to say, I did it twice. And that's the Nile River, and they got some monuments there. Now, there's some things we know for sure, and other things that might be possible, but hasn't been confirmed. But there's all these grain silos across Egypt, and anyway, I just want to show you a few of those. Now, it depends on the dating. There's 3 different timelines for Egyptian history, and so there's different theories on this. But if you go with the dating King Solomon gives, I'm going to follow his recommendation. So he said the Exodus happened 480 years before he reigned. So if we went with his, he was the wisest man, but if we went with his recommendation, these are things that kind of fit in the puzzle of the biblical timeline. So this is actually the first pyramid made in Egypt, and it's for this in honor of the Pharaoh Dosher. And some people think that it was actually Joseph who designed this pyramid. And then the grain silos are connected, are in the same area. And here's some grain silos, grain pits. And that's inside of one of them. Now, I want to sprinkle in a few archaeology facts. I didn't get to see this place, but they actually found the tomb where Joseph was in. And this is from the documentary Patterns of Evidence, which is on Right Now Media if you want to watch it, or you can buy the DVD. And they found a statue of Joseph with the coat of many colors. And it was larger than humans, so it's of royalty, of importance. And so these are actual photos of the statue. You can see the coat of many colors. And it was smashed. Remember, his request, Joseph's request, was for the Israelites to take his body out of Egypt. And so they took it to Shechem. Remember that name, Shechem. Okay, so moving on to the Exodus. I want to kind of go through, once again, there's many different timelines. Got the early dating, late dating, but I'm going with what King Solomon recommended. And so if you go with that timeline, these would be the pharaohs of the Bible, of Exodus. So you got Tutmosis the first, and he was the pharaoh who gave the order to kill the baby boys. And he's the father of Hatshepsut. In Egypt, they asked if they could help me pronounce her name. They said, well, just say hot chicken soup. Now, they actually found skeletons of Hebrew slaves and also of graves of many baby boys in Egypt. Now, some people think Hatshepsut is actually the queen. She became pharaoh at one time. There's many pharaohs in a short time frame. But she was actually the queen that rescued Moses. And that's a temple made in honor of Hatshepsut. And then she married Tutmosis II, who was the pharaoh of the oppression, who wanted to kill Moses. And Hatshepsut ruled for a short time until Thutmose III grew up. So I think this is actually the Pharaoh of the Exodus, Thutmose III. Now, how would you think his identity would be? I mean, what type of description will this Pharaoh live up to? Well, I'm going to read a few of those descriptions. Now, he actually died in 1450 BC, and that's the same date Solomon gave to the Exodus. Now, he is one of the greatest pharaohs in history, known as the Napoleon of Egypt. He had 17 military campaigns, and it stopped at 1450. And he wrote the Book of the Dead. He was really into magic. This guy was really into snakes. And he even had an inscription of a snake, or a staff turned into a snake inside his tomb. And they found his tomb, but the body inside the coffin was not to his age. So they probably the body was of a man who was in his 20s, not in his 70s. The body should have been in his 70s. So there was a replacement body inside the tomb. And so that's the Valley of the Kings, that's his tomb. See that inscription? To me, that looks kind of like a staff turned into a snake. I mean, that's just what it looks like to me. Once again, this guy is really into snakes, as you can tell, all the snakes inside that tomb. Well, there's a biography of Thutmose III written by Amenhotep, and he mounted to the heavens, he joined the sun, divine limbs mingled with him, he begot him. And then once again, King Solomon said the Exodus happened 480 years before he reigned, which would be 1450 BC. Now what's interesting is Thutmose III, his firstborn son died. And then his name was Amenhotep, and his second-born son, Amenhotep II, his firstborn son also died. And so Amenhotep II, this is his second-born son, Thutmose IV. Now, if you go to Egypt, you see the Sphinx, and you can see an inscription, and it's this poem giving a reason why the second-born son became the next pharaoh, and not the firstborn son. And then the next pharaoh, Akhenaten, and he changed his name because he changed his religion, Amenhotep, he changed his religion from worshiping many gods to one God. And he actually, in a song written by Akhenaten to his God, there are 17 verses that sounds like Psalms 103. Now, did you know there's an Egyptian document that describes the 10 plagues? It's written, from their perspective, but sounds very similar to the 10 plagues. So I encourage you guys to Google that, because we're short on time. And that was the list of the different plagues, how they match with the description in Exodus. Here's me standing at the Red Sea. And so I'm filming, I got to go on a trip with James Norton. He's making a video series called The Story of Redemption. And we went there's only 3 possible places where they could have crossed, because it's a very rocky terrain, mountains, and so there's only 3 beaches that are big enough for the Israelites to actually go to. And so there's a red path, and so I believe it's at a beach called Nuweiba. And then they crossed the Red Sea into Saudi Arabia, which Paul mentioned in the Bible, that he talked about Mount Sinai being in Saudi Arabia. Now, the next couple of slides are just things I'm going to kind of throw out there that sounds very fascinating. Once again, there's things we know for sure and other things that might be possibilities. And so this is more of a possibility. But King Solomon put 2 pillars crossing, marking the crossing of the Red Sea. And so that's the beach. You could go to Google and look up these places. You could type in Nazareth or Galilee or Nuweiba. And so my dream, I hope someday someone's going to dive down to find those chariot wheels. So there's a picture of the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. Now, what's interesting is below the mountain, it's chained off by a fence. You're not allowed to go in there. And there's things that seem to fit the biblical description. There's inscriptions and carvings of what looks like a cow. And remember, the Israelites worship Baal on top of this mound of stones. And so there's carvings and inscriptions, and there's a menorah. What is that doing in a Muslim country? And then there's places to do animal sacrifices below the mountain. And there's even a rock that split. Now, I don't know, but there's a story about Moses splitting a rock, and there's a dry riverbed coming from this rock in the desert. Now, this is a place I would love to go to, but I think it's a little difficult to go to Saudi Arabia. Okay, so we covered the Egyptian history. Now I'm going to go into kind of the Old Testament and New Testament. So let's go through Joshua. Now, this is a place I actually got to go to. You could go and stand at Jericho. Now, what's interesting about Jericho, the walls fell inward, just like what the Bible said, except for one section of the wall. And I was on a tour, so I didn't get to have a lot of time to see all the different parts. I just had that one photo. But there's one section of the wall that survived that reminds me of Rahab. And then remember, the Bible says, God said, do not take any of the food. Well, all the food is still there. The food is in jars, and they burned the grain. Exciting evidence for Jericho. Now, Joshua destroyed many other cities, and one of the cities he destroyed is Hazor. And they found a stone with the very name of the king that Joshua killed, and his name was Jabin. Now, remember Shechem? That's where Joseph was buried. Well, remember this verse is one of my favorite verses. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for your day, this day, whom you will serve. And so Joshua put this stone in Shechem as a reminder of their commitment to God. Now, there's archaeology evidence with the name Belshazzar. Remember, that's in the story of Daniel, and the hand of God wrote on the wall. They have his name in history. Now, this is exciting. We actually have evidence for David and Goliath. They found this piece of pottery with the name of Goliath on it. They also found this inscription with saying the house of David. So they found evidence of the house of David, evidence for King David. And this is the city of David in Jerusalem. Bethshean, okay, this location, this is actually where when King Saul's sons were killed and they hung them and put them on top of this mountain, that's the mountain. Okay, this is Hezekiah's tunnel. And you can walk through the tunnel. Here's an inscription with his name, and there's still water going through the tunnel. Okay, so this is a cave where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a little shepherd boy who's throwing rocks, and he just threw a rock, and he heard a noise. He broke some jars, and he went and he turned in those scrolls, and it turned out to be the biggest archaeology discovery of all time, because before this discovery, there was a span of 900 years in between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the oldest document that we had previously. And so archaeologists were excited to see, has the text stayed the same, or did it change over time? And it was the same. And they found every book in the Old Testament except the book of Esther. There's me pointing at it. And that's what the jars might have looked like. And the great Isaiah scroll, which has prophecies about Jesus, was dated between 100 to 150 BC. So that's another example of the Old Testament being read in before Jesus was born, showing that he fulfilled prophecies. So that's the great Isaiah scroll. That's me in the Dead Sea floating. I recommend it. And so King Herod, he built many palaces. And so this is one of the palaces called Masada. Just an amazing place. And this is where the Maccabees had the last revolt, and the Romans made a ramp and went up that mountain. And all the Maccabees, the last revolt of the Jewish fighters, committed suicide, except for one person, and that was Josephus, who was the Jewish historian who wrote about Jesus, and he was not a Christian. He became a Jewish Roman historian. Let's go into Bethlehem. Now remember, King David lived in Bethlehem. A lot of the stories of the Old Testament and the New Testament cross over. And here's a drone shot from Bethlehem that I got. Now remember, Mary and Joseph had some problems trying to find a hotel to stay in. Well, we had a few problems there too. We got a flat tire, so I just reminded James, the minister. I said, I think Mary and Joseph had some problems in Bethlehem too. So this is the Church of the Nativity. And what's interesting is they built this over the ancient little town of Bethlehem, and they actually found graves of the baby boys that were killed by King Herod. And you could go down and see those. And Bethlehem is a small little town, so they built this big church on top of it. So they think this is actually the cave that Jesus was born in. And now, I don't know if they know the exact spot, but they have a spot. But this was the town of Bethlehem. Now, this is another fortress King Herod made. And he actually made that mountain. And then he put his fortress on top. And then where James is standing, that was his swimming pool. And they found the tomb of King Herod. Now, it was smashed. People hated him, and so this tomb was smashed, but that's in the museum in Jerusalem. Now, this is Galilee. Every time I see biblical movies, I always see like desert and sand, and yes, there's parts of Israel that look like that in the south, but in the north, especially in March, it is beautiful. It reminded me of Malibu, where I went for school, and just very, very beautiful. And I've heard you could grow any type of a fruit tree there. And now this mountain, some people think this is where Jesus gave the Great Commission, because he said, go to the mountain. And when we think of a mountain in Galilee, this is the mountain. A beautiful view. So this is the traditional spot of the Beatitudes, and they build a church. Now they build a church over the places where these stories took place to have as a marker, as a place to remember the site. So there's James teaching about the Beatitudes, just a beautiful place. Now someone mentioned, I saw all these yellow flowers or plants everywhere, and I might be wrong in this, but someone said that was the mustard seed plant. And so if that's true, I'll need to go fact check that with my lawyer back there. But anyway, just beautiful, and that could be the mustard seed plant. Now, that's the Sea of Galilee. It was so much fun. This is my favorite part about going to Israel, was going on a boat ride in the Sea of Galilee. And they found an ancient boat to the 1st century during the time of Jesus. And by the Sea of Galilee is Capernaum. And this is an ancient synagogue. And they built synagogues, over and over again. But you could see the original synagogue on the bottom, on the base floor. And next to the synagogue was Peter's house. So this is Peter's house. It's still open if you want to come visit. And there's been people throughout history making a pilgrimage to the Holy Lands. And this is one of the places early Christians came to with significance. And they built this spaceship-looking thing on top, so you could go and look down through the glass and see Peter's house. Now, isn't it amazing how Jesus left, everything to follow Jesus? And Jesus still blessed him with having his own restaurant. You could go and get St. Peter's fish in Galilee in honor of Peter. And you can go and get baptized in the Jordan River. Now this is the most popular place to go because the water is clean, and this is in Galilee in the north. But the place where Jesus probably got baptized was in the south, where it's more desert, and this is where John the Baptist would have been preaching. And you could tell the water's kind of dirty because there's a lot of people who come to get baptized in the Jordan River. Now in Jericho, this is a place called the Mountain of Temptation. And so it's kind of in honor of Jesus being tempted by the devil for 40 days. And it's a pretty amazing place. When you go inside, they have, all these churches have beautiful artwork. And at this monastery, they have all these paintings of the devil tempting Jesus. That's the theme. And so it's interesting seeing all the different paintings on that topic. Now this place, Caesarea Philippi, this is a special place to me because in history, this is the place where Jesus took his disciples and asked the question, "Who do you say that I am?" Now the history on this place is all the other, I'll use the word pagans, were worshiping all these idols that were on this mountain. They had all these idols to the pan god, and even that cave they thought led to the gates of hell. Now that's the context. So now when you think about the story when Jesus said, "Who do you say I am?" This is what it would have looked like. We finally made it to Jerusalem. We started in the north, we worked our way down to the south, and now we're in Jerusalem. Now this is Solomon's temple, is where people believe it's located at, and the Muslims built the Dome of the Rock. And this is a model of what it would have looked like during Solomon's time. And then the Dome of the Rock is actually marking the place where they think Abraham tried to sacrifice Isaac. And the Jewish people want this piece of land, and the Muslims want this piece of land. And then here's just the remnants of the Western Wall, of just a little bit, some pieces of the last remaining piece of Solomon's temple. Now, the Jewish people are actually getting ready to make the new temple. This is a gold menorah. I mean, it's out in public. They're ready to move in once they get permission, and they have plans to do that. This is the southern steps. So this is the place where Jesus would have walked into the temple. This is the place where Peter would have given that famous speech in Acts when people would have said, "What shall we do to get saved?" Now, for going into Solomon's temple, you would have to wash yourself. So there's actually all these places where people could have got baptized right there. So this is the location. Jesus heals a blind man. Jesus heals a blind man at the pool of Siloam, recorded in John 9. This is the place where Jesus healed the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethsaida. Now, you could actually go to Bethany and go inside Lazarus' tomb. And this is a church built over the place where they think they had the Last Supper. Now, this isn't the actual room they were in, but this is a church built on top of the location. This is the Mount of Olives. Can you imagine Jesus praying here? Can you imagine Judas walking up with a flame to betray him? Okay, I love the ocean. So this is Caesarea Maritime. This is where Pontius Pilate spent some time at. They actually found a stone with his name engraved on it, showing that Pontius Pilate was a real person in history. And that's the actual stone in the museum. And that is exciting evidence. This is a church built over the place where Caiaphas, the high priest, who was against Jesus and helped persecute Jesus. And so this is the church built over the place where he had a house. And they know it's his house because only a high priest was allowed to have his own dungeon, his own prison. This is the prison Jesus would have been in. Now, they actually found the bone box of Caiaphas, the high priest. They found the bones dated to a person in his 50s. They found his name inscribed on the bone box. and as a very fancy bone box. So this is once again exciting evidence for the Bible being true. They found evidence of crucifixion, and this is a guy named Yehohanan, probably mispronounced it, but close enough. And they found inside this bone box an ankle bone with a nail, showing that the Romans did crucifixion. It's a real thing that happened in history. Now, this is one place where they think the crucifixion happened for Jesus. Is one possibility, mainly because at the time it looked like a skull was in this cliff, but since then the nose fell off, and it's one possible place. This is what a early century tomb would look like. This is one place where people think Jesus might have been buried, but it's not the traditional place. In fact, a lot of archaeologists don't think this tomb is quite old enough. It's in the right distance from the original city of Jerusalem. But most scholars think this is the location where Jesus was buried. It's called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the entrance. And it's pretty amazing going inside of it. So they built this building on top of where the tomb would have been. So the tomb would have looked like this. You could look this up in the National Geographic magazine. And so originally it would look like this, where Jesus was crucified outside the city gates. And they said it was about a stone's throw outside the city's gate where you could see the crucifixion, and then the tomb was nearby. And I think actually it was from the crucifixion to the tomb is the distance of about throwing a stone is about that far away. And now so the Romans wanted to get rid of Christianity, and one way of doing that was they wanted to built their pagan temples and idols over on top of the sites of anything related to Christianity to try to wipe it out from memory. And so, I showed you the picture of the tomb, and now this is later on in history. They built the Romans built a pagan temple on top of that spot to try to erase the memory of the empty tomb. Well, later on, Constantine destroyed it and got rid of that and built this church to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to remember the spot. And so actually by what the Romans did trying to erase it actually preserved the spot so they knew where it was at. And so there's the building. And then this is, if you go inside of it, this is what it looks like. They have these beautiful paintings, and recently in the news they took the stone, they moved the stone that was covering the original stone that the body would have been laid on. So that was in the news recently. Now they have two different churches kind of built where Jesus ascended. Once again, I don't know about if they know the exact spot, but on the Mount of Olives, Jesus will come back the same way that he ascended. Now, the Muslims, they think they could stop Jesus because they filled in this gate. They thought maybe that could stop Jesus. When he comes back, he can't walk into the city. I don't know. I don't know about that. This is exciting evidence. So I think this is a possibility. There's an inscription found in Nazareth called the Nazarene inscription. Basically, is a Roman law saying anyone who steals a dead body would be put to death. And this was found in the hometown of Jesus, which is about a 2-hour car drive from Jerusalem to Nazareth. I think that's pretty exciting. Okay, now let's speed through the travels of Paul. So I'm going to start off with, I got to go to Joppa. Remember, Joppa is the city where Jonah lived in, and Peter stayed at the house of Simon the tanner. This is where Peter had the vision. Now, I'm not quite sure, I haven't researched how credible this place is, but there's a place in remembrance of it. But the bigger picture, the city is there, Joppa. And that's the city that Jonah lived. That's the city that Peter lived, where he had the vision. James and I, we got to travel to Ethiopia to do a video filming about the Ethiopian Munich of Philip talking to the Ethiopian Munich. And so we got to go to Ethiopia and visit the Church of Lalibela. King Lalibela wanted to make the New Jerusalem and built these churches carved out of stone. And this is a church that looks like a cross. And going inside is amazing. The Africans are dressed up that look similar to Jewish priests, and they're praising God and have paintings of Jesus. So now let's follow the footsteps of Paul. So I got to go to Corinth. And next time you read 1st and 2nd Corinthians, those letters are read to the people in this city. And in Corinth, there's an inscription, Erastus. Is that how you pronounce it? Erastus. So if you read the last chapter of Romans, Paul was basically giving his thank you notes to people. And one of the people he thanked was Erastus. You could see his name carved into the cement, kind of like how we put our handprint in the cement today. I got to go through Rhodes. Rhodes was mentioned in one sentence in the Bible. We got to go. We got to see it. We went to Athens, Greece, and I got to stand on Mars Hill. So this is an amazing place to go to. This is the place where Paul gave his apologetics, his defense for Christianity. Remember in Acts 17, the Greeks had all these different idols, and they even had an idol to a god that maybe they forgot a god. But Paul said, I know this unknown God, and he was able to preach about Jesus to the Greeks. If you go there, watch out. The marble is very slippery, by the way, on top of that mountain. No flip-flops. Paul also went to Crete. From Crete, he went to the island of Malta. And at Malta, he had the shipwreck. And you can actually go to that island of Malta. I'm on a boat. Luckily, we didn't get in a shipwreck. But I did see a shipwreck. True story. There is a modern-day shipwreck in Malta. So be careful. And surprisingly, Malta had a lot of history to it. I just thought it was just an island, but a lot of history to it. About a big book about all the history since Paul, that's happened there. Now, when I got off the boat, walking up the island, I was remembering my Bible. It's like, didn't Paul get bitten by a snake here? So, just looking around, making sure there's no snakes on this island, And there's a statue of Paul. Archaeologists, long story short, used the Bible as a textbook because Paul wrote descriptions of where they dropped the anchor. And they went to the same spot and they found the anchor to the ship Paul was on that got shipwrecked. So I went to the museum and was able to see that. It's actually the anchor on the bottom of the screen, that first anchor there. So Paul finally made it to Rome. There's the Colosseum. There's the Roman Forum. Right there is a prison called the Maritime Prison. And this is the prison where the enemies of the state stayed in. So both Paul and Peter would have been in here. And there's a statue, inscription of them, artwork, kind of showing them, baptizing the guards in the prison. And there's a shot from inside the prison. Now, this is a church made over the location where Paul was buried. A beautiful church. Now, you might be asking, why does Paul have a sword? Wasn't he a man of peace? Well, he's holding the sword of the Spirit. This is the church inside, beautiful church. This is the place where they think Paul is buried. And then also, I got to visit the Vatican. Now, if you visit the Vatican, make sure you give yourself plenty of time. It takes a long time. There's beautiful artwork, just incredible, walking through the Vatican. This pillar marks the place where they think Peter was executed, and then they say they have his tomb inside St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican. Now, Isn't it amazing how Jesus said, on this rock I'll build my church? Just can't think about it. The biggest church in the world is built over the place where we think Peter was buried. Now, I didn't get to make it to Patmos. It wasn't on our schedule to go to, but there's always a reason to go back. There's always plenty of things to see. So I've heard you could actually go to Patmos, the island of Patmos, and they have a cave where they think Paul wrote the book of Revelation. Now, my tour guide, he told me there's actually some carvings inside the cave, and of course, we made the joke is like, could that be the missing chapter that God said don't write in Revelation? I don't know, but anyway, this is the cave that John was in prison. Now, and all the disciples died for their faith except for John, who died on the island there. And nobody would die for a lie. They would die for the truth there. Now, I got to film a video with Dr. Robert Jeffress with First Baptist Dallas, and so he did a sermon in Megiddo. And this is where Armageddon is going to happen. This is the location where the end of the world is going to take place. And also, King Solomon had made some horse stables there. You can see the archaeology. And then remember the Pharaoh of the Exodus? He had 17 military campaigns. Well, he had a battle in Megiddo. Interesting thought. So I got to visit all the Holy Land places, just some of them. And after I see everything, I guess the only thing left is heaven, That might be the last, Holy Lands experience to go to. But that's actually some artwork I drew of Jesus with the resurrection. And then just to give a couple notes at the end, that's the end of the presentation, but I want to give some resources. So once again, Preston Crest Church Christ has access to Right Now Media. Right Now Media is like a Christian Netflix. I'm on the video team. I get to interview people and capture their testimonies. And so we have a lot of really good videos you guys can watch to learn about the Bible. We have a new video series about the Gospel of Mark, and we have Francis Chan teaching it. It's coming out soon. Also, I got to produce a video series called Think Like a Detective with J. Warner Wallace. He was an atheist for 35 years, and his wife dragged him to church, and the pastor said, Jesus was the smartest man that ever lived. And that got him thinking. He never used his skills as a detective to analyze the Gospels. And so when he did that, he realized that the authors of the Gospels were telling the truth. And so anyway, you can watch the video to watch a detective talk about the evidence for Christianity being true. And I interview people, so if anyone has a testimony you want to share, or if you know someone who has a testimony that might be good to record on camera, let me know. And that's my main job. Recently, I was able to make videos with Sean McDowell. So you could go to Sean McDowell's YouTube page, or you could go to Right Now Media. I made these short training videos. They're about 2 to 3 minutes long, and they answer big questions, hard questions about our faith or the evidence for Christianity being true. It's a good resource. And then this is my announcement to the class of a new product I'm excited to announce here. So I made my own website, and it's called apologeticsquickguide.com. So if you type that in, you can have a resource to give the evidence for Christianity. And it's supposed to be something just very simple to use that you can share with people. And so if you type this website in, you could watch the trailer to know what it's about. You could click on, does God exist? You can watch the 20-minute video and then see the quick guide underneath. You could click on, is the Bible reliable? And watch the 20-minute video and see the quick notes. Did Jesus really claim to be God? I had some Jehovah's Witness knocking my door the other day, and they do not believe that Jesus is God. And so I said, hold on, let me pull up my iPhone, let me get my quick guide, let me get my notes here. And so I was prepared to have a good conversation with them. And also, the case for the resurrection. Is there historical evidence for the resurrection being true? And so I just finished this video, and And so I'm excited for you guys to use this as a resource. It's a free resource, and it's on the internet there. So it's called Apologetics Quick Guide. Well, guys, thank you for coming today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thank you for allowing me to talk about what I'm excited about. You guys have a good day.